What if the very truth you cling to, fed to you by the media's relentless reach, was nothing more than a carefully woven web of lies? Because now they want you to believe Bryan Kohberger's the dumbest PhD student in history. So we know what's a lie, but what's inadmissible? How open is this open and shut case? And what does this mean moving forward? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. And if an open conversation is something you prefer, then this is the place for you. Welcome to The Point, so let's talk about it.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Now, the idea this survey was spreading misinformation throughout the citizens of Idaho was absolutely 100% incorrect. And as I pointed out in my previous video on the subject, this survey was nothing new. And if you listen to his testimony, he brings up the fact that he's used this exact same type of survey in several high-profile cases across the country, to include some in Idaho. So what has Bill Thompson so upset? Well, we all have heard within the mainstream media and some creators on social media that this case was a done deal, that essentially it was over before it began. But we know now that this narrative floating around online that Bryan Kohberger is some type of hunter is factually incorrect. And it has been proven false in the court record, with both the defense and the prosecution making the statement he did not stalk these individuals. He did not stalk any of these people within that home. So obviously now they want the narrative to be that Bryan Kohberger is absolutely the dumbest PhD student in history. The original narrative surrounding this case was Bryan Kohberger hunted at least one of these victims. He passed that home multiple times, going back months before this attack. He planned every single detail so he would not get caught. But if he didn't stalk those individuals, that means you're trying to convince me that somebody who is studying criminology picked a home where there would be cameras all around it. He picked a home where there would be individuals walking to and from their residence, going from party to party at all hours of the night. He picked a home where the driveway was packed with cars. That's what you're trying to say he did. He decided that 1122 King Road was the absolute best home to commit this crime. And he would have had to completely ignore all those other factors. He would have to completely ignore that it was in a city and there would be cameras. The driveway would be filled with vehicles. That would mean the home would be filled with occupants. And there is a high risk of individuals walking all over the place at all hours of the night. You're telling me that a criminology student would pick that type of home for his target? That is the narrative they're trying to push now. Since he didn't stalk these people, that would make him the absolute dumbest criminology student I've ever heard of. Somebody make that make sense. If we're to believe that he didn't stalk these people but still pick that home, we would all agree that's incredibly dumb. But then that would go against the other narrative floating around online that Bryan Kohberger has to be the smartest person in the room. And if you like what we're doing on this channel, go on and hit that like button and leave a comment down below. Because I told y'all in a previous video, when this trial starts, everybody needs to be prepared to be blown away. Because what we're being told is factually incorrect. And the statements made by the prosecution and the defense validate that. And in my own opinion, Bill Thompson is so mad right now because this entire case is on eggshells. Because in addition to the factually incorrect questions asked on the survey, he makes reference to some of these other questions being inadmissible in a court. Because he goes on to say that other than those factually incorrect questions on the survey, there were other questions on that survey where that evidence is inadmissible or possibly inadmissible and may not even make its way into trial. But what possible inadmissible evidence is he talking about? Now, some people make the case that it's the DNA that's going to be inadmissible, and that may very well be true. I personally believe that what he's referring to are those cell phone pings they like to reference in that probable cause affidavit. They like to mention in that probable cause affidavit that Bryan Kohberger stalked that home prior to committing this act. And the reason I believe some of that cell phone data is not going to be allowed into court is because the defense alludes towards the tail end of that hearing that they have evidence to prove that some of that data is incorrect. Now, if you believe it's the DNA or you believe it's something different, you can let me know down in the comments below, because you're all aware I read these comments and I reply to almost all of them. And I want to know from y'all right now, how open and shut is this case? Because to me at this point, it sounds like it's more open than shut. And I personally believe the vast majority of the evidence they have is just circumstantial. But that leads us to the problem moving forward. There has to be a narrative when the vast majority of your evidence is circumstantial. And the fact that he wasn't stalking one of these victims validates my concern about this investigation being rushed. And if that's the case, doesn't law enforcement only have themselves to blame? Because to me, they are lacking a key piece of evidence when you start talking about a circumstantial case. And the information I'm referring to is motive, or a reason for this crime to be committed. Now, simply saying, like Bill Thompson did very early on in this case, when Bryan Kohberger was still wearing orange, that he was going to do this, and if he was out on the streets right now, he would do it again, doesn't seem like a real valid argument to make. Because if he's that individual who is going to commit this crime or do this crime somewhere else again in the future, there's another key piece of information they're lacking. And that's some sort of history of aggression or some sort of history of attacking individuals. And from everything I was able to read online, there is not a substantial amount of evidence to validate that Bryan Kohberger has this long track record of being aggressive or violent towards anybody. And since it's already been proven in court that he was not stalking any one of these individuals, that calls into question every other anonymous source that you've all read. I would question the validity on all these other stories about what he's purchased, because we've heard anonymous sources say he purchased that weapon. We've heard anonymous sources say he purchased the coveralls. But the big thing that was tying this story together online was he was stalking those individuals. That is false. And for everybody who believed all that information to be true, where are you at now? Does this change your position on his guilt or innocence? Are you starting to come back towards the middle and only see suspicion? Having only suspicion at this point is a valid thing. But I don't see how anybody believes he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt with what's available, especially when one of the key pieces of your storyline has now been proven false. Now, I don't want to get on this platform and make the argument that this entire case is only hanging by a thread, but it's certainly not hanging by steel cables either. Have we all not thought it was hypocritical that Bill Thompson would get up there and tell the judge he's ready for the trial this summer, then turn around at the next hearing and say it'll be next year before he's ready? But at that same time, make the statement that the victims' families being denied justice is torture and they need to push this trial forward, while at the same time arguing over everything. I don't believe it's fair to say that this evidence getting to the defense is the prosecution's fault when you factor in the wide range of sources this stuff is coming from. But Ann Taylor was correct to say that she's never had a situation where she had to get in front of a judge and have an argument about having an argument. Every little thing she's doing, he's pushing back on. And I firmly believe at this point the reason the state is pushing back so hard on everything is because their evidence isn't quite as strong as people want to believe. Now, if he wasn't stalking these individuals and no motive's been provided, and the vast majority of the evidence they have is circumstantial, then they're going to have to place Bryan Kohberger in that home for him to be found guilty of a first-degree passing. That's just my own opinion, and if you see it differently, you can let me know down in the comments below. But nothing as of now puts him inside the home. Anybody saying that the DNA on that sheath places Bryan Kohberger inside that house is factually incorrect. That is circumstantial evidence. That is just touch DNA. It is not nearly as strong as you like to tell people. Previously, I was leaning heavily on the side of suspicion and nothing more than suspicion. But given how the state is arguing over everything, in conjunction with the statements the defense is making, it certainly makes me want to question how strong this case actually is. But I warned a lot of people, don't trust these anonymous sources, because there's some backdoor deals that go on when you start talking about stuff like this. And the information to come out at this trial 100% proves what I'm trying to warn people about. This case may not be as strong as you think. Now, whether that's because Bryan Kohberger's innocent or the state messed this investigation up, we'll have to see at trial. And if you like my thoughts on this, check this playlist out right here. Y'all be safe now.